Now, the budget segment of Chi-Fi Audio continues to welcome a constant influx of new contenders, as always, looking to usurp that throne of being the budget Chi-Fi king. But there are fringe releases that probably aren't right on the radar for like a prospective buyer, but they do have the chance to attain a sort of cult following with perhaps like a unique tuning or some kind of special feature. And I do believe that this Kiwi Ears Dolce belongs to that latter group of IEMs. Now, why is that? Watch this video to find out. Now, as far as the unboxing goes, the Dolce has a pretty basic small box. However, as always, Kiwi Ears does a very good job with their graphic design, with clean typography, and these colors, they sort of evoke something that comes from a Behance project, which I really dig. It's just clean graphic design, and there needs to be more recognition of that in this industry for real. Now, sliding out that sleek cover, you're gonna get the inner box with this printed green Kiwi Ears logo, of which when you take the top out of here, you're gonna get the Kiwi Ears Dolce themselves displayed in this little, I would say it's like a fur covered cardboard cutout, pretty standard presentation, I guess. Below that here, if we take this one out, you're gonna be getting this small little cardboard box, which if you open it up, it contains the little cable wrapped very tightly, and of course this little Ziploc bag, which contains the narrow bore ear tips that come in slightly customized colors in 3 sizes. And finally, at the very bottom of the box, you shall see this little QC sticker badge kind of thing. And well, I guess that's about it for the accessories, honestly. There's really not much to say here. Honestly, a very bare bones package. Like, this is just not that much in here. I would have really liked to see like an extra carrying pouch in the package. But nevertheless, many similarly priced IEMs also have some pretty barren accessories, so I guess I can't blame Kiwi Ears here. Now, taking a look at the Dolce themselves, you'll see a plastic shelled IEM. It's actually quite similar to like the typical KZ IEM in terms of the build. You have this matte front plate here with a gradient from sort of a light blue to closer to a deep navy black. It's the same deal as the Cadenza though. The IEMs look better in the pictures and footage than they do in real life, where the sort of cheap budget build aspect still shines through, and you can see a little bit of gluing inside the insides, but to be expected for this. The cable that's included is also pretty bad, to be honest. It's got this, I guess, unappealing shade of brown. It tangles quite easily. It's gonna start exploding everywhere and then becoming a tangled mess. The microphonics are just average. There's also no chin slider, which is pretty unfortunate. And the weirdest thing is, so you have these 2 wires here, they're stuck together, and your chin slider is essentially you tear the wire apart, and that's how you make your own one-time use chin slider. Again, this just screams cost-cutting. The molding around the QDC 2-pin connectors are also a little interesting. So hopefully you can see here, there's a light, I guess you would call like a bit of a bend to them. They're kind of slightly angled outwards when you plug them in the Dolce, which is interesting. It looks a bit different instead of using the generic clear plastic part. I don't know why they did it, but sure. Otherwise, like most IEMs built in this style, the entire package of the Dolce fits fairly well, is light and comfortable, and you won't have much trouble fitting it in your ears. With the Dolce, I often find myself veering towards either warm dark sources or something warm and bright, like my Ibeso DX160. But as far as the power goes, the Dolce is pretty efficient and it runs fine out of pretty much anything. Now, ear tips wise, it's not often that I prefer the sort of stock ear tips that come with an IEM, but in the case of the Dolce, I think it really does have that recommended match capability. So the stock tips will be what I use for the listening sessions, because other tips, well, they kind of change the sound in little ways that make the Dolce sort of lose that distinct presentation. So nevertheless though, if you want a little bit more warmth, I would also recommend the Final E ear tips. They're also a decent choice. For me though, with the Dolce, it'll be the stock ear tips. But with all that out of the way, let's get to the sound of this Kiwi Ears Dolce. Overall, I would say that the Kiwi Ears Dolce has a bright V-shaped signature. Not something you often see in the market recently, and it's got a bright lower treble range, which is a polarizing choice, but it is actually something that I quite enjoy. But let's start with the bass first. Based on the Dolce is decently extended. You got the warmth and the boominess of a healthy mid-bass presence, maybe a little bit too much, but it's alright for the most part, with a little bit of that rumble from the sub-bass trailing not far behind. Now it fills out the relatively recessed lower mid-range, and it stops the Dolce's highs from just being too jarring. I guess my gripe with this low-end performance is that the detailing, the bass detail, it can get very monotonous, and there is a bit of flabbiness being introduced to the sound, for better or for worse. And you also have this somewhat unnatural bass decay. Going to the mids. Now the mid-range of the Dolce is not the best, but it gets the job done. You know, lower mids are being pulled back a little bit, which usually would be something that I dislike, but it kind of works here, giving space for the bass bumps and the treble. Upper mids, they enjoy a pretty standard presentation, maybe a little bit brighter, but also somehow slightly recessed, which will reflect in vocal tracks where the voices will often be, they'll be pulled slightly behind the instruments. The entire implementation of the mid-range is pretty sound, I'd say, even if it's not the star of the show, and has adequate separation with little in the way of raspiness or graininess, though some artifacting can be heard here or there. Now let's talk about the treble of the Dolce, which is the star of the show, for better or for worse. You have a large and a sharp boosted amount of lower treble energy that it introduces a sort of sharpness and perceived clarity, being able to cover up its lack of actual treble detail with just sheer quantity. It sounds like a bad thing, but it actually works quite well. It's the type of treble where you know this is a gimmick, but it gives a very striking and impressive first impression. I know it's a bit of a gimmick tuning, and probably over time you might figure out that gimmick and it goes away and you're left with something a bit mediocre. But for me, I've had it for a few months now, and surprisingly the gimmick hasn't worn off on me. It actually has grown on me, if anything else. Granted, at times this overboosting does affect the overall tonality and the striking crispiness in the music. It's something I really enjoy, but it can make sounds sometimes a bit thin. But 80% of the time though, overall it's just a very pleasant, crisp, bright treble that is definitely not something you commonly find right now. The soundstage width of the Dolce is decidedly average, nothing you haven't seen from other $20 tier sets, and the soundstage height is just barely there, making for very rudimentary and basic imaging capabilities. Don't expect much from there. Detail and resolution is also not a strength on the Dolce. Don't get me wrong, it's plenty acceptable with macro detail separation and all that. But micro details, well, they rarely make the stage, but overall, again, it's nothing we haven't seen before. I think the tuning oddities will be the main selling point for the Dolce, not its technical chops. Now, we've established that the Kiwi Ears Dolce is more of a niche set. So let's compare it to a more mainstreamish, mainstay, kind of general good sounding deal to see what's different with the Moondrop Chew 2 here. So build-wise, the Chew 2 takes the cake with a heftier metal shell, more premium feeling, and a better cable, as well as the extra carrying pouch for storage compared to the Dolce's mostly plastic build, kind of horrible cable, and honestly, very bare bones in terms of the accessories. Sound-wise, we see a clash between the odd but charming tuning of the Dolce compared to the more, I guess you could say, safe and refined sound of the Chew 2. Bass on both will have similar quantity and quality, for trading blows in terms of the impact. But mid-range, it sees more significant differences with slightly lower mids that are slightly warmer and a much better, more delicate handling of vocals on the Chew 2. Whilst the Dolce, it tends to pull back vocals, and sometimes the vocals will have a slight edginess to them. Treble on the Chew 2 is reserved, just enough to give a sense of air, whilst the Dolce here, it goes for a lot more bombastic presentation with lower treble energy. It introduces the sharpness at a cost of a bit of consistency and coherence. The technical ability of the Chew 2, personally, I still think it seems to slightly edge out the Dolce with somewhat better micro detailing, right? This is very much a polarizing difference, I guess, but if you're someone looking to just start out with a nice set, the Chew 2 probably fits the bill better. But if you want something a bit more, I guess, specific to a personal taste, something a bit more exotic, then the Dolce is going to be the set to get. Now let's also look at another budget Kiwi Ears IEM, kind of a sister model to the Dolce, which is the Cadenza, which was originally what catapulted Kiwi Ears as a brand into the spotlight to compete with like Moondrop, Sound Notes, and everyone in like this $20-$30 segment. Basically, what you're seeing here is that both IEMs are plastic, and both look, honestly, better in the picture, promotional materials, and the videos than they do in real life. But the Cadenza's more pebble-like shell shape and the sort of shiny resin look, it wins it over for me. Sound-wise though, the sets see strong differentiation. The Cadenza's bass is closer to the Chew 2's profile, yeah? And it trades a bit of that thumpiness for a bit more refinement compared to the Dolce. Mid-range on both, they aren't standouts, but I feel like the Cadenza is going to be the more conventional take, and it's easier to listen for especially like long-term sessions compared to the Dolce's, which has a slightly pulled back lower mid-range and all that. Treble of the Cadenza, honestly, it's pretty forgettable. It's nothing special, which makes the Dolce's unique handling a lot more of a standout here. And it's overall, the Dolce is just a more fun set. Technical ability on both sets, well, they're quite similar, but I guess the Cadenza being $10 more expensive than the MSRP of the Dolce, you can argue that with roughly similar technicalities, the Dolce would be the higher bang for buck set because it's a bit cheaper. Just seriously though, if you have the Cadenza and you want the Dolce, or vice versa, I think you definitely won't need to worry about the two sets sounding too similar to each other. Both have very divergent aesthetics and tuning tendencies, and it does, if nothing else, show that Kiwi Ears has a little bit of everything for everyone. offering, diversity in the products and all that. With its niche but ultimately charming bright V-shaped tuning and a crisp, sharp treble performance, the Kiwi Ears Dolce presents a more, exotic proposition in the budget segment compared to the more conventional tuning approaches in other staple IEMs now from Moondrop and Sound Notes. Certainly, the tuning of Dolce is a bit of a gimmick, but it is a gimmick which doesn't overstay its welcome and will do nicely as a fun and quirky little set, breathing in much needed diversity into the current, quite crowded budget market.